Order. Question number 3, Andrew Little.
Tēnā koe e te maunga o te whare.
Tēnā koe.
Taki pātai ki te pirimia. Does he stand by his statement that he has a comprehensive housing plan, given the continued decline in home ownership and rapid rise in house prices?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes, and here's why. The government's comprehensive housing plan includes our social housing build, our emergency housing program, special housing areas, the expanded Home Start scheme for first home buyers, freeing up surplus Crown land, the national policy statement, RMA reform and extra tax measures we took last year. And Sunday I announced a new $1 billion housing infrastructure fund to support infrastructure needed for new housing in high growth areas. And we're considering independent urban development authorities for areas of high housing need. By any definition, this is a very comprehensive housing plan.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
When fewer than 500 affordable houses are being built in Auckland this year, where in his comprehensive plan is the policy to build the thousands of affordable homes that are so desperately needed?
Speaker.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Member's incorrect in his assertion.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
If his plan is so comprehensive, why did Nick Smith's Crown land policy find just 13 of the promised 500 hectares?
Oh, that's too
the Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, as the member would have seen, the Minister of Housing and Building announced more land today. And Mr Speaker, if one looks across Auckland, looks at the level of economic building activity, one will see how significant it is and how quickly it's ramping up.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
If his plan is so comprehensive, why have only 1,000 of the promised 39,000 houses been built in the special housing areas?
Order, the right on. Order. I just need a little more cooperation from the front bench to my left. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, member might want to believe that stat, but once again it's incorrect. If one looks at the level of both building activity and houses that are being completed in Auckland, they are significantly greater than the member says.
Supplementary question, Tim McIndoe.
Thank you, sir. To the Prime Minister, how is the government's comprehensive housing plan translating...
Order. I want to hear the question. If I hear that sort of little interjection again, I'll be warning a member, and if it happens again, I'll be sadly asking that member to leave for the balance of question time. Would Mr McIndoe please start the question again?
So, to the Prime Minister, how is the government's comprehensive housing plan translating into more houses being built around New Zealand where they are most needed?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker. Mr Speaker, there are many signs that the government's comprehensive housing plan is delivering more houses. For example, we're now in the middle of the biggest housing boom New Zealand has seen. We're on track to build 85,000 houses across New Zealand in this term of Parliament alone. The construction industry is the biggest it's ever been. We have around 40,000 more people working in the sector than just 2 years ago, and there are 42,000 apprentices being trained across the country. The government will press on with its housing plan to build on this good momentum.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
If his plan is so comprehensive, why did Bill English build only half the state houses he promised?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I think the Minister himself would say that it took Housing New Zealand a little longer, actually for some of the very reasons we've been trying to resolve ourselves through slow planning processes and the like. But actually, the numbers increasing to what we had anticipated, and those 2,000 I think that have been promised will be built.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
If his plan is so comprehensive, why did Paula Bennett have to make up the mythical MSD flying squads?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, the Minister didn't. The Minister put together a team of people through her ministries that engage with a variety of NGOs, and I think have been doing some very good work to help those people.
Order. Supplementary question, Tim McIndoe.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What reports has the Prime Minister seen on trends in home ownership rates in New Zealand and the factors contributing to those trends?
Mr Speaker,
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I've seen the Productivity Commission's very thorough report on housing affordability. It made a number of very valid points. First, New Zealand's home ownership rates peaked in the late 1980s, early 1990s, when around 75% of private dwellings were owned by their occupants. By 2012, home ownership levels had dropped to around 65%, which was about the average for the group of the OECD countries for which data is available. And third, the Commission noted that the house prices increased rapidly through the 2000s when the rental market expanded to accommodate households that favoured renting over home ownership. So this is a very long-term trend that matches what's been happening in other countries.
Don't worry about supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question.
Address me properly.
Order. Order. I want less interjection from both the Honourable Dr Nick Smith and the Honourable Annette King. Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
In light of the answer to that last question, and if it is correct that there is really nothing to see here, nothing is out of the usual, why is it that he is begging the Reserve Bank to just get on with it when it comes to them controlling housing policy?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, because the Reserve Bank is one that can control LVR ratios, they're certainly giving some strong consideration to increasing LVRs for investors. There's some anecdotal evidence that by musing on these things that might encourage investors to buy now, and so if they are going to make a change, my preference would be that they do just get on with it.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Andrew Little.
After years of failed housing policies, a budget that completely ignored housing as an issue, last-minute announcements and panicked flip-flops, doesn't he agree that his housing policy is just comprehensive chaos?
The Right
Speaker,
Honourable Prime Minister.
No, if one looks at the level of construction activity in Auckland, it has grown in double digits year after year over the last 3 or 4 years. It's been a substantial increase. It's why we have 24,000 more people working in the construction sector alone in Auckland and 40,000 across New Zealand. And interestingly enough, Mr Speaker, if one does spend just a little bit of time in Auckland and goes around and has a look at the level of activity and the number of people engaged, New Zealanders actually, I think, in Auckland can see how much work is being undertaken. They also appreciate that these things just don't happen overnight. And the reason why Labor continues to poll 25 or 26% is because...
The last part will not help the order of this House. Order. Question. Order. Question number... Order. Question...